It is a journey through the Bible with Mukhwana Isaac. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. In our previous sharing, we saw actually we looked at the right ideas of a faithful few. This group of pious Jews is the one we talked of, we referred to as the Anawim, the poor of Yahweh. And today we look at the poor of Yahweh. The prophet Zephaniah has best described the spirit of these holy ones, the chosen and faithful remnant of Israel. On that day, I will remove from your midst your proudly exultant ones, for I will leave in the midst of you a people humble and lowly. He describes that, for they shall pasture and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Zephaniah chapter 3 from verse 11 to 13. Yes, humble and lowly. In the passage above is a translation of Anawim. Yes, Anawim. And this, of course, means Anawim is a Hebrew word which literally means poor ones. Anawim meant poor ones. Anawa meant poverty. And so ancient Israel never thought much about poverty, though although there was always poverty in Israel, and according to God's promises, the Jews thought that they had a right to riches and security. Those who were poor were locked up and looked up as missing the good things God had promised. The prophets actually changed this idea, however, for they saw that poverty was due to injustices and not only misfortune. Now, a prophet who changed it, where this is much more pronounced, is when you look at Prophet Amos, who talked about the injustices, who abused the injustices in the land. So, he condemned that. The prophecies looked on the poor. Yes, these prophets looked on the poor as innocent victims of the sins of the unjust rich. The unjust rich. They looked at, them as people who were doing something bad, and they condemned them. So they had to come in to protect them. But this does not mean that poverty automatically became another name for holiness. No, poor people could also be sinners. But the prophets the prophet's use of the idea of poverty was developed into a spiritual meaning. The prophets taught that God works on man only when man recognizes his need of and the dependence of course on God. And obviously it was the poor ones and the poverty which gave the best language to express their need for God. A poor man knows he has nothing. He depends solely on others. And of course the poor people knew that above all they needed God. And so the real meaning behind the word Anawim, the poor ones, is really the humble ones. Those who recognize their needs of and their dependence on God. The book of Psalms has also called has also been called the book of the poor, simply because the Psalms express this lowly dependence and the total surrender to God. There had always been a few holy people in Israel who knew they depended on God completely and who knew that they could rely on his help in all trouble. Their dependence showed itself in the spirit of meekness and humility. And so these lowly ones were named in the language of poverty. They were the Anawim, the poor ones. Their spirit was called Anawa, poverty. It was those who had this spirit of Anawa who would be the faithful remnant from whom the Messiah would come. The prophet's task was to develop this spirit in the people. Seek ye the Lord, seek righteousness, seek humility, which is poverty, Anawa, and perhaps you may be hidden on the day of the wrath of the Lord. Zephaniah chapter 2 verse 3. This is actually this group, to this group the Messiah will bring the message of salvation, which will heal the wounds of the suffering. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good tidings to the poor, to the Anawa, to the Anawim, the Anawa, to bring it, the message to the Anawim, to heal the brokenhearted, to comfort all who mourn. Isaiah chapter 61 verse 1 and 2. In fact, the Messiah would come from this group and would be an example of meekness and humility, as Zechariah foretold. Lo, King, come to you. He says, lo, your King comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he. Yes, Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9. It was the prophecy about the suffering servant of Yahweh in Deutero Isaiah which added much of the Jewish understanding of the value of God's eyes, of the humility and lowliness of the poor person. For it would be the lowly poor servant who would bring about the salvation of many. Isaiah 52 verse 53. This just and innocent man is described as having done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. He bears great suffering and the hands of his followers, of his fellow men who have despised him. Could anyone plead his cause? He had no form or calm lines that we should look at him. Isaiah is trying to describe. But among all this suffering, the servant remains silent. He says this servant remains silent and meek in the truest sense of the word. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth like a lamb that was being taken to the slaughterhouse. He was taken and no one dared to come to his rescue. And so that is why we even see during when we are taking the stations of the cross, somewhere we talk of a lamb that is led to slaughterhouse, and yet this horrible death which he freely accepted for the sins of mankind will be the source of mankind's salvation. He was wounded, he was beaten. The sufferings of this poor man, which will save and sanctify sinners, will be followed by his own glorification. And when he makes himself an offering for sin, he shall see his offerings. He shall prolong his days. He will, of course, he will prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the fruit of the travail of his soul and be satisfied by the knowledge, by his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. And so in this, actually it is in this servant of Yahweh that the true idea of poverty of spirit that is humility, meekness, lowliness, and dependence on God, finds its best expression in the Old Testament. By the time that the Messiah had come, there were people in Israel who were truly poor in spirit, such as Joseph, talk of Zachariah and Elizabeth, Simeon and Anna. Simeon is this man who was in the temple when Jesus was born and told Mary that a lens will pierce what? Your heart. Now, from amongst them, God chose the most lowly in her own eyes to be the mother of his son, and that is none other than Mary. After Christ's death and resurrection, the disciples at last understood the real meaning of the suffering servant and learned that everyone whose life must be an imitation of his. That brings us to the end of today's episode. Tomorrow we shall look at the wisdom literature of the Jews. And here is where we look at books like Psalms, we look at the book of Job. Just stay tuned, just not even staying tuned, but just like, comment, share, and subscribe. I have been Mukhwana Isaac with the Journey Through the Bible. Be blessed.